Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today, Sister Mary Peter and Sister Mary Media. Sister Mary Peter is a poet, writer, and former sex worker who found her vocation through the Radical Faeries in 1987. Her lifelong activism focuses on HIV-AIDS, queer youth, civil rights, and social justice. Her efforts include partnerships to provide street-level health services to sex workers, legal aid for LGBTQ refugees, and resistance to police violence. Sister Mary Media, a longtime member of GBF, is one of the original sisters from the Order's founding in 1979, where she currently serves as Mistress of Grants. She speaks frequently about the group's history and her vocation as a secular nun. 2 days before an election of historic consequence, the topic, Deconstructing Our Illusions, will focus on our role in transformation. And I think I will let them explain the rest of that to you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us back. I was saying earlier that Mary Media kind of comes with a shop, but you're letting me in as an act of courage or foolishness. So I appreciate no matter how you're choosing to do that. When we were asked to help today with the Dharma talk, the fact that it was 2 days before an election in the middle of a pandemic and an economic catastrophe did cross our minds as things that Buddhists also have to address. And I want to share with you an approach to how we enter into those questions together from our practice. Mary Media will share an incredible story from the Buddha's life that I think is very illustrative of this moment. But I also want to recall some of the work we've done together before and just have that in our hearts as we start listening to one another. And then, as we always do, if you're okay, after a little storytelling and kind of clarification, we'd really like to open this to a conversation. So I do a lot of Zooms. So just in this one, if it's easy to use the chat feature to raise a question, that's fine. If you want to do a little gesture from your reactions to let us know you want to say something, that's fabulous. Or if you just want to tear in, we can work with that too. So if those are okay for structuring the conversation. When Mary Media and I have been with you before, we have talked a lot about the importance of this Sangha and the work that you do, both in terms of your own practice, but also the practice of this group and who you are in our community and in our culture and in this moment. And in our first conversation with you, one of the things we talked about was you are a Sangha that is on some level asking questions about how you become more diverse in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of color and experience. And in that conversation, we talked about our practice as a tool of liberation, a tool that releases our minds from preconceived ideas and limitations and naturally draws us into connection and conversation and community with the people around us. And we talked about how the Sangha is an engine of liberation, of connection in our community. When you were kind enough or foolish enough to invite us back, we talked about how in this culture, in this moment, there is a whole economy around meditation, a quantification, a commodification of the tools of our liberation that we labeled mindfulness. And that's the idea that our practice is an individual mandate that allows us to be calm and accepting and okay with the fact that the world is being destroyed in front of us. We'll still be okay on our little island of calm Buddhist practice. And in that conversation, with your help in our chat, we really exploded the falseness of that this mindfulness, this idea that my practice belongs only to me, is an illusion that is being exploited by commercial interests, both to make a profit, but also to block political change. And in that conversation, we talked again about how the Sangha as a group is an agent of liberation, and our practice, what we understand as our practice, is a shared experience. And in that shared experience, it gives us a unique power and a unique ability to transform. And now, all these months later, things outside the Sangha have clearly not gotten better. The world is literally on fire, at least in California. It is literally on fire. We are at 230,000 Americans dead from a pandemic that could have been stopped ages ago. We have the largest economic collapse in our history since the Great Depression. And there is this upheaval in terms of race and gender and culture and fairness. And I can't speak for you, but I know for me that is terrifying. And I really wonder if anything I do in my practice can address any of that, can help with any of that. I feel powerless often, especially after watching the news or taking part in a conversation with people struggling for justice. But Mary Media is going to share a story. It comes from Sinhalese Buddhism in the South. It's a folk tale about the Buddha. I think it captures this moment we're in, and I'd ask you to listen to it with a beginner's mind for some clues to how it's resonating in your life. And then when Mary Media is done with the story, I want to open up a conversation with you, reflecting on a few things. We called today Deconstructing Our Illusions because all of us are frustrated PhD students, and titles like that have a colon sound really smart. So I'm just going to be honest, that's where that came from. But I used it because I think what Mary Media and I are trying to talk about with you is this is a moment where things are perceptibly falling apart. So deconstructing is basically falling apart, but with responsible ownership and action. It's not outside of my ability to shape. It is me actively participating and tearing all of this down. And I'd like to offer that as a beginning because I think if we're talking about our Sangha as actively taking responsibility and ownership for helping shape how everything is falling down around us, I think that's a unique path that Buddhists have something to say to, and that offers, I think, hope for real transformation in each of our lives, for our Sangha, and for the communities that we love. So we're in little cubes, but with a nod or wave or reaction, can I ask, does that sound like a decent way to move forward? Oh, all you Zoomers, I love you. Okay, over to Auntie Mary Media.
Oh, thank you so much, Mary Peter. It's always a pleasure to be here with you because, well, I guess, when the topic was going to be about falling apart, I know that's when you decided to call on me to be here with you. So I love when the sisters and the GBF get together because we're both groups that reside at the intersection of spirituality and queer gay community. And I really love that my two communities join together every once in a while. So the Jatakas are a collection of about 550 stories and anecdotes illustrating how to live a good life. They're kind of like, the equivalent of the parables in the Christian Bible. And the first one of the Jatakas is called Demons in the Desert. And it's kind of a description of a journey across a wilderness. And so it's very metaphorical of the entire process of having a Buddhist practice. So it's framed from the perspective of the Buddha, who was giving one of his talks when there was an argument broke out among some of the monks. And so he decided to tell them a story to kind of illustrate the way forward. And this particular story is about correct thinking. And the way that it begins is, in times long past. So there were two merchants, kind of like bros of their day, perhaps, getting ready for a trip to sell all their valuable goods and tchotchkes. And they were kind of like the Amazon of their time, because they had like 500 carts, all of them with like bulls to pull the carts, and drivers who, it's not clear whether I don't think they had invented kind of independent contractors yet, so they were employees. So they had like this, it was a big deal to get these carts from where they were to the marketplace. And they were both heading to the same marketplace and would have to use the same road. So it was clear that they couldn't both use the road at once. It'd be like, 101 at rush hour. And so the first dude starts thinking to himself, well, how can I get the upper hand? By going first. Because the road won't be full of potholes. My bulls will get the best grass. My people will get the best fruit and veggies. Everyone will see me as a fabulous leader. And so being first to arrive, I'll get to set the best price for the goods as well. So he says to his friend, well, we can't go together. So who's going to go first? If you want, I can, unless you want to, but I can totally go first. So the other merchant is like, the first 500 carts will smooth and flatten the road. And his bulls will eat the old rough grass, and mine will get the new tender grass. They'll get all the old fruits and veggies, and my drivers will get a fresh, new, tasty crop. So I won't have to waste time when we get there setting the prices. That'll already be taken care of. So he says, nah, bro, I'm good. You go first. So the first dude's thinking like, yes, what a loser he is. He's thinking about all the money he's going to make when he gets to the market as well. So his caravan sets out, and they're making their way through the wilderness to a place called the Waterless Desert, which the local people said was haunted by demons. So when they get to the Waterless Desert, they spot this large group coming from the opposite direction. And their carts are smeared with mud and dripping with water. It's like, seems to be plenty of water around. They had lotuses and water lilies in their hands and in their carts. So the merchant dude says, he had the head dude of the other carts says to the merchant, why are you carrying these heavy loads of water? There's an oasis not far away with plenty of water to drink and dates to eat, and your bulls must be so tired from pulling all that extra water. Why not throw it away and be kind to your overworked animals? Now, the local people had warned the merchant about all these helpful strangers he would meet, but the merchant thinks, these local people, they're all yokels and they're dumb. What do they know? What he hadn't considered is that these people he was meeting were not real people, but demons in disguise. They were even in danger of being eaten by these demons. But he ignores the warning and he thinks, that's brilliant. We'll dump the excess water and refill at the oasis up ahead. Kind of like just-in-time manufacturing. He saw himself as breaking the old way of doing things and doing something in a new way that's really smart. Maybe you know of people like that or have heard of people like that in our age as well. But as it turns out, there was no oasis and there was no water up ahead. At the end of the day, all the people were exhausted. The bulls were wasted from lack of water and couldn't pull the heavy carts, and all the people and animals passed out. During the nights, the demons came in their true frightening forms, kind of like the people you might meet in the back of the Powerhouse Bar on Folsom Street. Anyway, these demons gobbled up every single one of the weak, defenseless beings, leaving only the bones lying scattered around. Okay, so move forward to several months. The second merchant sets out with his caravan. And when he arrives at the wilderness, he had a company meeting and he says, this is called the waterless desert. And I've heard that this is haunted by demons and ghosts. Because he's listened to the townspeople. There may be poison plants and foul water, so don't drink any of the local water without asking me. After getting to where the first caravan met their fate, they also encountered the water-soaked demons in disguise. Same story. Oasis is near. Throw away your water. Blah, blah, blah. But the wise merchant saw through them right away. He knew it didn't make sense to have an oasis at a place called the waterless desert. And besides, these people had bulging red eyes and an aggressive and pushy attitude. So he suspected they might be demons. So he told them, get lost. Then seeing that his own people had doubts, the merchant, who was actually the Buddha this was the Buddha in a previous lifetime, he said to them, don't believe these people who may be demons until we actually find water. The oasis they point to may be just an illusion or a mirage. Have you heard of water in a waterless desert? His people listened and thought about what the boss was saying and didn't throw away a single drop of water. So the caravan continued on its merry way, and that evening reached the place where the first caravan's people and bulls had been killed and eaten by the demons. They found the carts and the human and animal bones lying all around, so they were careful and stood watch that night. The next morning, the people ate breakfast and fed their bulls well. They added to the tchotchkes lying all around that were in the first caravan, and they finished their journey very successfully. They made a killing in the marketplace, and they returned home safely to where they and their families could enjoy their profits. So the moral is, always be wise enough not to be fooled by tricky talk and illusions. And the second moral is, stay hydrated. So, Mary Peter.
This is why I love Auntie Mary. Only she could take a 4th century Sinhalese Buddhist parable and turn it into a 21st century contemporary drag emporium. This is a unique gift, and I celebrate it. Does anybody want to venture their reaction to that story, how it hits you in this present moment?
Well, it hits me that there's a lot of information going around. You have to create some discernment about what you listen to and what you don't listen to.
Mm-hmm. For me, what resonates is this idea of trying to seek advantage, getting the upper hand, or in some cases an early start. But you can see even in the story that advantage could be either way. There's something advantageous to going first. There's something advantageous to going last. But for me, what really speaks most profoundly is the focus on advantage loses the truth that is always nearby. the local villages notice that it is a waterless desert. That's clue number one. Number two, there are demons that manifest as friends. Be careful of who you speak to. And if either group had been listening closely, what different kind of outcome would there have been if it wasn't seeking advantage or overcoming an opposition, but collaborating in some way to get to the other side of a parched desert filled with demons? Do you think they would have made different choices? For me, that is kind of the heart of that story in this current moment. I'm not going to risk my political affiliation being disclosed this early, but does the conversation about demons offering easy solutions resonate with any of you 2 days before an election? Just curious. Mm-hmm. Yeah, many of them. So, and that's kind of what I'd like to get into with you. This is a really unique moment in a lot of ways for this Sangha, because this is not just an election like any other. This is an election that is, I think, happening in a moment of great truth-telling. There are plenty of local villagers all around, including each of us, who are able to say, this is not quite right. Something is not appropriate here. Something is off. And that sense of truth is something that comes in times of a pandemic. I've been doing a lot of reading with all this quarantine time at home, and there is an author. His name is Nicholas Christakis. I don't know if he's familiar to you. He's a medical doctor. He teaches at Harvard. He's also a sociologist. He wrote a new book. It's called Apollo's Arrow, The Profound and Enduring Impact of Coronavirus on the Way We Live. And this phrase really leapt out at me, and I just want to share it with you. Plagues reshape our familiar social order. They require us to disperse and live apart, wreck economies, embolden liars, and replace trust with fear and suspicion. They also elicit kindness, cooperation, sacrifice, and ingenuity. That sounds a little bit like the Jagta that we just heard, doesn't it? This time of peril presents us with choices to follow into lies and evil, or to make choices that reflect kindness and compassion and ingenuity. And in the middle of all of that, in a democracy, we are having an election. So for many of us, that is a terrifying thing. I think for a Sangha like this, that is a moment of great spiritual opportunity. And when we talk about this as a Sangha, we've talked about this when we talk about our practice as an agent of liberation for busting through illusions. And I think in an American context, there are some things we have to be very clear about. The stories that our culture tells us. And like that Jagta, our culture emphasizes competition over cooperation. We value individual achievement more than we value shared social advance. We have a culture that promotes choice, but if we think about it, it is usually a base act of desire. It's not choice rooted in values or in a practice of liberation. And we speak a lot about the freedom to be anything that we want to be, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. There are so many icons of the self-made person. But this cultural moment right now, the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, the protests that 25 million Americans have taken part in, they have revealed, I think, in a unique way for many people, that we're living in a system, a constructed system, rooted in what a lot of people call plantation capitalism. And that's a system that promotes the exploitation of one group, manipulates others, And all of that is for the economic benefit of a small elite. So when we talk about deconstructing our illusions, it's important, without judgment, we see the system in which we're working. And as we come to an election, I think it's important we also realize we talk a lot about one person, one vote, how America is the oldest democracy, how our systems are here to promote democratic values. But if we look a little more clearly, we see that we do live in a democracy of sorts, but it's one that is based on very specific compromises. And those were compromises that ensured power was distributed in certain ways. So when we talk about one person, one vote, well, yes, that's true, unless you are a First Nations person, or a slave, or a person of another color, or a woman. One person, one vote meant only white men of property. When we talk about how those votes are counted, the critical issue in this election, the original system was designed to create checks and balances so that white men who owned property and people in the South had an advantage. That advantage let them dominate politics through the Civil War. And then very quickly, within 20 years of the Civil War, they regained that powerful place because they made an alliance with Northern industrialists at the expense of many other groups. And much of modern American history is the conflict between that elite group and everybody else. And that is very much the conversation that is unfolding in the middle of this democratic moment. There are a lot of people who are wondering why the Senate, our most deliberative body that was designed to be a council of elders, if you will. I always think about the elves in Lord of the Rings and their deliberations. That's what it's supposed to be. But in the last little while, that body has not promoted a second stimulus package to help 330 million Americans. It's instead pushed forward with the nomination of a Supreme Court justice, an important choice, but not necessarily the most time sensitive. And last week, the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, in closed session, was asked why he was making that choice to favor that process over the economic stimulus. And he was very honest. I don't know if he thought anyone was listening. But he said, and I quote, "Because this is a change that cannot be overturned anytime soon." And when we go back to the Jakta, the people the Buddha was telling those stories to were his own disciples. They were people who were practicing Buddhism. But if you read into that story, there are 500 people who got a very fixed idea of what that meant. And where they came out was that their karma meant everything in their lives was predetermined, that their choices had no moral value, and that their practice helped them calm and focus, but really was not important in terms of determining their future, the shape of their society, their obligation to help any other person. They'd gotten very rigid in their thinking, and they believed that everything was already predetermined. And the Buddha told them that story because he wanted to break through and say, no, karma does not predetermine. Your choices matter, but they must be rooted in this embrace of truth. They must be rooted in a clarity of thought and a perception of the space around you in ways that are meaningful. And lest we think we're alone in sometimes getting caught in this mindset, I want to share another story very briefly. It's from the book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's a story of Martin Luther King when he visited India in 1959. So if you don't mind, let me just share an excerpt from that. In the winter of 1959, after leading the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife Coretta landed in India. He told reporters, "To other countries I may go as a tourist, but to India I come as a pilgrim." King wanted to see for himself the place whose fight for freedom from British rule had inspired his fight for justice in America. He wanted to see the so-called untouchables, the lowest caste in the ancient Indian caste system. One afternoon, he and his wife went to the southern city of Trivandrum in the state of Kerala and visited with high school students whose families had been untouchables. And he discovered there that the people of India had been following the trials of his people, were aware of the Montgomery boycott, and were excited to see him. He went to meet the principal of the school, who made an introduction and said, young people, I would like to present to you a fellow untouchable from the United States of America. King was floored. He had never expected that term to be applied to him. He was, in fact, put off by it first because he did not see the connection. Then he began to think about the reality of the lives of the people he was fighting for. 20 million people consigned to the lowest rank in America for centuries, still smothering in an airtight cage of poverty, quarantined in isolated ghettos, exiled in their own country. And he said to himself, yes, I am an untouchable, and every Black person in the United States of America is an untouchable. And in that moment, he realized the land of the free had imposed a caste system, not unlike the caste systems of India, and he had lived under that system all of his life. And it was what lay beneath the forces he was fighting in America. So even Martin Luther King did not fully appreciate the context of his own struggle. And so I think that gives us a certain freedom when we're thinking about our own position in front of all the events of today. They can seem overwhelming. There is so much energy coming at us with manipulation and deception, playing on emotion. And so I just want to invite us to think about how our practice is really the tool to guide us through this challenging moment, and how it is the presence of the Sangha that heals and holds us. Because in a lot of ways, what we are seeing today are the 4 sights that the Buddha saw. As the Buddha was learning his own practice, he saw the old person, old systems, things that were decrepit, that showed weakness. He saw the sick person, vulnerability, our own fear, our own mortality. He saw the corpse, right? The final death that comes no matter what our strivings try to accomplish. And then he saw the holy person, which I always found interesting. And then I realized in this present moment, for me, seeing the holy person is kind of being presented the temptation of extremism. In the face of age and sickness and death, I can choose a path that isolates me from all of those things by taking an extreme and rigid form of practice, asceticism, isolation, determinism, purity of ideology. Again, these forces of extremism, they are alive right now as our whole culture is looking at the 4 sights the Buddha saw on a mass level. Massive unemployment, massive death, massive social dislocation. But this is where I think this Sangha has particular gifts. And I want to invite Mary Media to kind of lead us through a conversation about that and really how we use the beginner's mind and the Sangha and the noble truths we learn to kind of hold and balance and move through this moment in a way that is healing.
Thank you, Mary Peter. I'd actually like to hear from other people, but let me just say that it does feel to me that our practice, and in particular the Noble Eightfold Path, with the 7th element on the path, correct mindfulness, is one of the ways forward for us in terms of discerning, creating, like discerning the truth and discerning what is illusion and what is going to improve our own lives and the lives of our community and the world. Let me just, I would really like to hear from other people if anybody has some thoughts about your own ways of dealing with illusion, or whether retreat into our own kind of practice and not necessarily engaging in the world is sort of the path to mental health for us. Any thoughts?
My name is Asa, and I've been coming to GBF for many, many years. And I really appreciate the Martin Luther King story. I'm familiar with that story. I'm also familiar with being born and raised in a white suburb like Long Island, as I was, and raised in the Roman Catholic Church, and discovering that I was homosexual, and then, of course, participated in the gay world, the gay life on Long Island, in New York City, and Fire Island, and San Francisco, and in West Hollywood, and through the HIV-AIDS crises, and marching in the gay pride marches when they were primarily political actions. So I have a rather unique experience as a Black man, as a poor Black person, which I'm very middle class now, of what it was like being gay and looking at the Frontier magazines, and the whole dating experience, being gay and Black, I say driving while Black, but being gay while Black is a fascinating story. And I'm not sure if folks really can embrace the social experience of the gay experience, right? All of the things that gay people do and did, and how the African-American experience was either embraced or not embraced, or the social structure, which we've all grown up in, determines how we function socially and emotionally and spiritually. And the boundaries that were created through redlining and what have you. And, as a consultant for Wells Fargo Bank, I'd walk through the corporate areas and I'd see these gay flags all over the place. When I was working for IBM, the main thing was to be able to go to the IBM Country Club. And it seems like certain people got to do that and the other people were kind of forgotten. And I hope that people can really embrace our culture and how it marginalizes, alienates, and subjugates certain groups of people. And it's indicative, it's indigenous to who we are as gay men, as visual people who, if you walk into a video store, you will see the Asian section and the Black section and, the Latino sections. It's the way we divide ourselves up. But I will conclude by saying that even the language, we say a slave, there's no such thing as a slave. I'm an African-American person. I was never a slave. I was enslaved, right? We all know that. But the language kind of tricks us up a little bit, when we say the slaves. No. We lose the action part, the person who's doing, the perpetrator. We talk about, the prostitute, but what about the John, so to speak? So those are just some reflections that I have. I'm very interested in pursuing much more deeply the culture as we've talked about it and how it manifested itself over the past 4 years, particularly as it relates to as it relates to Latinos, Asians, and African Americans, and what we refer to as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I think it's a really important point, specifically in the gay world, because I worked in corporate white America, but it's a very interesting experience being in the gay world. So put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asa, for that, and for the distinction between slave and enslavement. I really appreciate the challenge to think about the language that we use, and so thank you. Bharadwaj, I'm sorry if I'm sorry about mangling your name, but you asked to speak.
Hi, Sister Mary Media. I think you did a very good job in pronouncing my name. Thank you. It's pretty archaic even for an Indian standard, and you can imagine high school. Everything must have been difficult with that name. I think I'll keep it short. I'm too small a voice given the very experienced people we have on the call today. I wanted to comment. I've been having a lot of recent conversations with friends on community bias, and something you said, it hit a nerve. You can, in this day and age of social media, everybody is empowered to absolutely destroy another person's life just based on speculation. And this can be from media outfits to nobody sitting behind a computer desk and creating biases on other people just based on speculation and not based on hard facts. And I feel very passionately about this. And my way of escaping this illusion right now, I boycott all kinds of media. I don't watch the news. I don't feel the need to sound like a smart person when discussing current affairs. I'm off social media. And those are some of the methods that I use to distance myself and really reflect on what my values are and who I am as a person and why do I have certain biases. Are they based on hard facts or are they based on how I am programmed by my parents, by society, by community? And I'm very much at the beginning of this journey. And I'd like to explore that further. Thank you.
I think we're all at the beginning of this journey. So anybody else have some thoughts or feelings they'd like to share? Just unmute yourself and speak. Well, it seems to me that
it's Tom Bruin.
Yes, Tom.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your talk. One thought I had is that, so the parable that you told was about right thinking. And Sister Mary Peter mentioned, this distortion we see going on where facts are distorted and fear is, put forth and all this stuff. And so, I can't believe that there's absolutely no distortion and all truth on, the Democratic side and 100% lies on the Republican side. And this isn't so much about the election that we're just going into, but how we move forward in cooperation. Because the parable that you told, both of them were self-serving. Both of them wanted their own self-interest. They just saw the situation differently. Instead of saying we'd be stronger as a caravan if we move forward together, And so that's kind of the way I look at what you shared. And so my question, I guess sort of a question is, how do we, pull ourselves up out of like what Bharadwaj said was, this social media that we get into, that we fall prey to, no matter whether we're liberal or, conservative. Like, how do we see beyond that blinder, and how do we see through the demons and the lies that are being told to us by people who appear to be very reasonable, in our camp?
Well, I was reading a talk by Lama Radoan on the Buddhist Peace Fellowship site, And he talked about deriving some perspective and some empowerment from ancestors, and from realizing that he is, at this moment in time, based on the actions and the relationships of people who lived hundreds, thousands, and years before, and that he is an expression in this at this moment in time. So to get beyond sort of the ego and recognize that you're kind of participating in a lineage, and that you're going to contribute, what you're contributing is going to affect the generations to come. And so I think that for me is kind of one of the ways we can look at the present moment and realize that the present moment isn't an accident. We are here because of, what people before us did.
I might also add that if we can learn to question our own moral impunity and our own feeling of certainty, and that there's a benefit to questioning where we stand and letting the ground be a little soft and uncertain, that cultivating that in our lives and in our friendships and in our places where we have some influence, that actually might take us out of this terribly polarized state that we're in. We have time maybe for one more thought or question or comment.
Can I chime in with this story more so? So last night I was talking with my mother, and she was talking about how she voted and how she recognized that there were these other names on the ballot that were not just Republican or Democrat, that there was other people that we don't look at because they're not the ones who have the money. So there's that aspect about our democracy too, around who is getting seen and how the narrative has become so narrowed in this division. And then I took a walk up to Nob Hill, because I live in Lower Nob Hill, and I wanted to go see the moon. And on my way passing by Grace Cathedral, I saw these two guys, these two bros, and they were wearing MAGA hats. And I was like, oh, okay. And, I felt all my inner rage, and I walked by in my gay way. And I just kept walking because I was just like, okay, there's no need to engage with these people. By this point in time, they believe what they believe, and there's no trying to talk someone out of their insanity around what they see of value in Trump. So there was that kind of recognizing there's no conversation there and having to just accept that. And then I went and sat at the park, and I had this beautiful view of the moon, and right across the way was Mars. And we're in this phenomenal moment, and I just took this chance to recognize that, okay, this is 2020. A pandemic is going on. We have this crazy election. And then what was happening in 1944 when the last full moon happened on Halloween? There was a world war going on. So we have this both, present moment, but then we have this cosmic level of the narrative too, and that these cycles repeat.
And I think we have to participate in both. We have to hold that awareness of both. I think, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, so yeah, just how to hold, right? And I guess recognizing that it's all just kind of, these are just stories, and we're all involved in this story.
Right. Mary Media asks, how do you know what you know?
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think we should keep in mind, that empires rise and fall. And, this historical moment is going to be, I think we should fight for the people we love and for the values that we embrace, but recognize that we have only limited control over the outcome.
And then the final point was also then I reflected, well, it was Halloween last night, so how do I know that those MAGA hats weren't just costumes?
Oh, that's great. Mary Peter, any final thoughts before we close?
Well, I just want to reflect back to the Sangha that this conversation is the antidote that we were talking about, both in the parable and in the story from Martin Luther King. That in this moment of great turmoil, as Nicholas Christakis said, the first things that happen in a pandemic are distortion, distraction, and lies, because that's how a virus spreads. When a government or an agency tries to hide the truth, tries to distract you from the pain, tries to get you depositioned. So we know that's the moment we're in, but ultimately it also generates kindness and collaboration, sacrifice and integrity. And, Asa today was very profound, just asking us to continue to reflect on the lived experience of a wide group of people. And this conversation we are privileged to have in a Sangha is not a conversation everyone is privileged to have. But as Mary Media says, because the practice is rooted in a line of ancestors, because we go back 1,000 years and we look forward another 1,000, we have this safety, this place of trust where we can share on a deeper level. And I think, as Jonas was saying, everything has to be questioned a little bit. Maybe the MAGA hat's a costume, maybe not. Maybe that full moon is playing a trick, maybe not. But if we have that openness, I think that's really what I think of often as the beginner's mind, and then I'm willing to be challenged in my assumptions. And like the Buddha talking to his 500, when we get to a place where we think everything is fixed or there are only so many choices, that's the moment to go back and sit in the Sangha and to wait for openness. Saturday Night Live is not a Sangha, but yesterday one of the things on the show was in one of the segments, they talked about the choice between two old white men. That's really not all we can achieve as a country, right? One old man versus another old man. I think that's a little bit of what folks have been getting at today. So just for me, I think my closing thought is just I'm grateful to the trust of this Sangha and the relationships that are built with the practice, and to just remind you that the practice is a tool of liberation for yourself, for the Sangha, and for the community. And that together in your practice, not isolated, but together, you are pushing forward liberation in our community, and you are pushing to a much deeper understanding that I think ultimately leads to healing.
Thank you. I have to be the voice of wrapping it up because we're at time. Do we have announcements? Anyone? Just unmute yourself and announce.
I have two quick announcements because it's Dia de Muerto. If you're thinking about those celebrations, the mission is often a community that hosts celebrations. This year, because of the pandemic, they're canceled. But there is a virtual celebration happening at 7 p.m. on November 2nd, where folks are building altares virtually. And today, the sisters are holding space virtually with an ofrenda that is online, where you can remember those who have passed. We have a particular focus on those who've passed from COVID. So I can share that information with folks, but I invite you to consider participating in both of those community organized virtual events.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I would just mention that on Wednesday nights, the Sangha meets and shares what's going on in their lives and tries to keep things in perspective. So I expect this Wednesday we might have some things to talk about. So 7:30 on Wednesday nights is a great place to really talk to the Sangha about what's in your heart.
And I want to remind us all that being part of this community, being part of this privilege, we need to share the wealth. So a $15 to $20 donation would be fantastic. And if you can't afford that, then something is better than nothing. And with that, unless there's another quick announcement, I'm just going to read this dedication. And we will think of joining our hands together and in friendship. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives. Thank you, sisters. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Cass. You look lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.